It was just before 4 in the morning on the western bank of the River Maas, and the quiet was about to end. A 20-year-old kid from a small Dutch village was about to hold off 400 German soldiers, alone, with a single rifle, for 6 hours. His name was almost never spoken outside his hometown. The newspaper that announced his death gave him 5 lines, and most readers turned right past them. Stay with this one, because the story doesn't end with the bullets in his stomach. It ends with a daughter he hardly knew, a tree on a Belgian road, and one Dutch word for a path through the trees that traces back to a single morning in 1940. His name was Cees Sleegers. A year before any of this happened, no one who knew him would have guessed he'd ever fire a weapon at anything. Cees was born in the village of Veldhoven in the spring of 1919. His parents baptized him with a long Catholic name, Cornelis Johannes Henricus, and raised him for a quiet life. He was a soft-spoken boy, sharp with languages and sharper with a sketching pen. As a teenager, he entered the monastery and trained to become a missionary. The dream was to teach overseas and live a life of chalk and prayer, but the calling thinned the closer he got to it. Just before he took his final vows, Cees walked out of the seminary and never went back. He went home, picked up his pencils, and took work drawing advertisements. Bottles, bicycles, women in hats. By his late teens, he could read and speak Dutch, German, French, and English. He sometimes read the same book in 2 languages, just to see how a sentence changed when it crossed a border. He had not yet held a rifle. The military letter found him at 19. October 1938. The army sent him to the 2nd Infantry Regiment in Venlo and assigned him as a batman, an officer's assistant who polished boots and ran messages. Cees Sleegers at 19 carried orders. He did not give them. It was the night of 9th of May, 1940. The signs had been there for days, whispers crossing the border, strange aircraft over the eastern villages. The men in the barracks slept with their boots on. At 3:55 in the morning, the German army came across the line. The 9th Division pushed straight through the Maas Valley near Grubenvorst, just past Venlo. The artist with the sketching pen woke up inside a war. Cees was sent forward to a concrete bunker on the western bank of the river, a small fortified position marked on the maps as G141. His unit's job was to slow the Germans at the water and buy time for the Dutch line to fall back. The artillery came first. Shells tore into the trees behind the bunker, throwing dirt and bark and pieces of men into the air. Cees heard his commanding officer shout something he never finished. A round caught the officer in the chest, and the order, whatever it had been, died with him. The men around Cees were down, or gone, or pulling back through the trees. The youngest soldier left, 20 years old, a former seminarian who had been drawing bottles for a living a year earlier, took command of the bunker, while the entire German 9th Division pressed against the far bank. The Germans started crossing the Maas in rubber boats. Their plan was straightforward: push enough men over the water that the Dutch couldn't stop them. Cees stopped them. He had one carbine rifle. The angle from inside the bunker was bad, so he did something nobody had trained him to do. He climbed out, a 20-year-old former monk alone on the open bank with no cover, lining up rubber boats full of German soldiers and shooting them out of the water one by one, for 6 hours. The Maas in early May runs cold enough to slow a man's hands. Cees worked the bolt of his carbine anyway, round after round, the smell of cordite hanging in the wet morning air. From across the river, the German officers could not make sense of it. Shots were coming from one position, then another, patient and accurate enough to keep their boats from reaching the bank. They thought they were facing a squad. They were facing one man, 400 soldiers. That is the number the records keep. 400 men held at the river by a single Dutchman with no cover at all. He should have died there. By the time the firing stopped, bullets had torn into his stomach and shrapnel was buried in his back. The hospital kept him for 6 months. The Maas defense line collapsed anyway. The Dutch army surrendered 5 days later. The kid who had held the bunker faded into a hospital bed nobody read about. The war, though, was not finished with him. When Cees finally got out of the hospital, he did not go back to his pencils. He went underground. For the next 4 years, he hid British pilots, moved fugitives through safe houses, and joined a network of farmers and priests and shopkeepers who fought the occupation in silence. By day, Cees looked like every other Dutchman trying to survive an occupation. Quiet, polite, useful enough not to be noticed. By night, he ran airmen through attics and ferried forged papers across town. One slip, one talkative neighbor, one nervous priest, and the Germans would have stood him against a wall in a courtyard and moved on by lunch. In the summer of 1942, he tried to make it to England through France and Switzerland. The Germans arrested him in Nancy. Friends back home forged him a new identity and got him out, and he went straight back to the work. When the south of the Netherlands was liberated in 1944, Cees was given command of an unofficial partisan unit called the Blue Hunters. After the war, the medals came. The Military Williams Order, 4th class, the War Cross. The medals were supposed to mean something. In Cees' case, they were pinned to a chest that no longer slept through the night. He tried to be a salesman. He tried to be a husband. He married a woman named Wilhelmina in the winter of 1957, and the marriage was over in 5 months. A daughter, Hani, was born a year later. Cees hardly knew her. Years later, Hani would say she grew up with a father who was already half a ghost. She knew his name. There had been a war, she knew that much. What she did not know was that the quiet man at the breakfast table had once held a river by himself for 6 hours. The medals were in a drawer. The story was not told. The headache stayed with him. The depression deepened. His languages went unused. His pencils stayed in their drawer. The man who once read sentences in 4 tongues couldn't bring himself to finish a newspaper. The man who had stood outside the bunker, calm enough to aim, could no longer sit still inside his own house. On 6 September 1965, Cees Sleegers got into his car and drove across the border into Belgium. Near a town called Arendonk, his car left the road and struck a tree. He was 46 years old. The newspaper Trouw gave him 5 lines on the front page. Most readers turned right past it. 44 years later, his daughter Hani stood in Veldhoven and unveiled a small green sign at the start of a 1,300-meter cycle path. The path runs away from the main road, alone, through the trees. It is called the Cees Sleegerspad. In Dutch, paths like that, the ones that leave the main road and go their own way, have a word of their own. They are called Vrij, free. That is all for this one. If Cees Sleegers got under your skin, hit subscribe. There is a man like him buried in every village, in every war, and War Stories After Dark is going to keep digging them up. Drop a comment about a forgotten soldier who deserves an episode, and share this story with one person who will appreciate what a 20-year-old monk did on a riverbank in the dark.